Welcome back to Gold Coast After Dark. Monday, July 12th, 2021. Uh, First off, I want to say, thanks for tuning in. Welcome new viewers, and welcome back to those who've kept the faith and want to see what's going to happen next around here. Also, thanks to Jimmy Page Turner, head of marketing for Babadook Records, Babadook Books, and now head of video correspondence, I guess you could say, for Gold Coast After Dark, for which, yes, he will be duly compensated for. Let me tell you about Jimmy. In 2012, he made a promotional video for a CD I was putting out called Apple Songs for Dave, for my pal Dave Lash. And it was a promotional thing. Jimmy was behind it. It is all Jimmy all the time. And it's wonderful. It is Jimmy at his best. So it's still available. You can find it on YouTube. Just look up under Bill Parker. Pre-death sale. That was a bit of marketing genius on Jimmy's part. A pre-death sale. In other words, you needed to buy my stuff before I died, and the prices went sky high because now they've become collector's items. Anyway, so check that out. Again, it's called the pre-death sale. Now, another thing, Jimmy pointed out in his description of me, he pointed out that one of my favorite articles of clothing is a t-shirt that says all the people skills of a rattlesnake. There it is. Jimmy wasn't making it up, and yes, I had this made up special. It's not the sort of thing you're going to find on the rack somewhere. The reason is I'm not a warm and fuzzy guy. I don't like group hugs. I don't go for any of that stuff. This isn't celebrity time. This is not celebrity hugs time. This is not anything. I'm not, as the English would say, I'm not a clubbable, I'm not a clubbable man. That's okay. I can be very polite. I was brought up with good manners. I just, as my friend Patrick would say, you just don't like people very much. It's tough to be a sensitive singer-songwriter, which I was coming across as, when you don't really much like people. Anyway, so that's the story behind the shirt, and just again to show you, Jimmy, he doesn't mince words. He's a straight from the hip kind of guy all the time, and glad he was able to help out. Like I said, every Friday he will be here. Whether we have mail or not, it'll be Jimmy's show. It's still going to be called It's the Mail. And if there isn't any mail to answer, Jimmy will just be Jimmy, which can be pretty interesting at times. Certainly entertaining. Never a dull moment with Jimmy around. Other thing, as has been pointed out, Gold Coast After Dark is an organic enterprise. We're learning as we go along here. It's all new. Um, so one of the things they're doing is, it struck me after the fact, was that my books, as short as they are, have a lot of anecdotes and asides and what could be called related sidebars in them. You know, now I don't stop at just, oh, here's a little footnote. I write a couple of paragraphs at a time. Now that can make for interesting reading if you're sitting at home, but if you're having someone read it to you, as I'm doing, yeah, it's maybe stuff you can do without because it doesn't really move the action along. It's all explanatory stuff, you know. Uh, and and the thing is, a famous baseball pitcher named Johnny Sane once said, "the the world doesn't want to hear about the labor pains; it just wants to see the baby." So I went through over the weekend through the next section of After Halloween that we're going to read. I went through and said, okay, this can go, this can go, this can go. So you're getting a condensed version of the book, but I think it moves things along, makes it better for everybody. So that's what we'll be going. We'll see how that goes. If you have any suggestions or anything, you know where to write. You know who's going to answer your questions. So, don't be shy. Okay, so now, before we get started, a quick drink. This is actually just some water with lemon in it. Not a lemon slice. I just got a thing, a squeezy thing of lemon juice and put an ounce or so in there. But look at that. It's on a little Prince mug. Isn't that nice? And on the inside, it's got little stars and things. So that's all right. You know. Okay. So let's get down to business here. So here we are after Halloween. And this is the second part of it that we're going to. Actually, it's the second segment we're reading. It's still part of the first part. And Mr. Three of Clubs takes us to the starting point, which is called On Boogie's Hill. So here we go. The day after I ordered my flute, it would be coming from Germany, uh, was also a day my supply of tea reached a desperate level. So I popped around the corner to the MCD grocery, it's about a 5 minute walk, to restock. Now, due to it being mid October and the fact we had many trees in the area, it's very green here. Autumn's turning leaves were very much in evidence. There was still a lot on the branches, though. There's plenty on the ground, but there were a lot still on the branches. But that would be changing soon with the continuing wind and the rain that accompanied the transition from autumn to winter in these parts. We're not far from the North Sea, and it affects the weather greatly here. Get high winds, get a bunch of rain. Now, there had been just enough rain the past few days that the leaves were too heavy to be moved by either the wind or the gas-powered leaf blowers the maintenance crews had fired up that morning at 7:30. I hate gas-powered leaf blowers, as anyone should. At any time, not just at 7:30 in the stinking morning, but any time. They're noisy, and they don't know how to use them. You hear a guy going, hold the trigger down, steady, do it, but no, that's too much to ask. It's 7:30 in the morning. Well, anyway, uh, because of the rain, the leaves glistened. They were yellow and orange red as a thin layer of color between the brown cobblestones I was kicking along and the slate gray clouds above. Now, my first thought was that October, with its turning leaves, fluttering and drifting on the breeze, early in the month, of course, it was more of a flute month. But October is a month of transition, and in the aftermath of the rain, the leaves would continue to separate from the branches, but they'd no longer flutter down on their way to the ground with dapples of sunlight. No, the additional weight from the rain would ensure they fell swiftly and relatively straight. I am not kidding you. You just sit there and watch, in October 3rd, it's, oh, look at that. Isn't that pretty? Uh, by the end of the month, it's it's all gone. It's just functional. October then began as a flute month and remained so, as we said, until the rains came. And then the flute's voice, which is imitated a bird song, if played properly by someone who knows what they're doing, would of necessity fade and could be replaced by the sort of melancholy and loneliness only a saxophone can evoke. But I didn't feel I'd made the wrong choice in returning to the flute after half a century. Now, 20 years earlier, when I was far more impulsive and my monthly income was well over twice what it currently is, I might have spent a subsequent Saturday tracking down a good used saxophone like a soprano. I love soprano saxophone. And that we had switched to it when the weather changed and the feel of the month changed and made it more of a saxophone month. But much had changed in 20 years. Times being what they were, I would be content with the flute. Now, maybe someone else had noticed the difference or had been aware of it all along and was at that very moment running a polishing cloth over their horn, checking the action of the valves or running through scales, preparatory to playing the final days of October on their way. It's important, though, that I get it right. I wasn't buying a flute merely to blow into, to make random sounds, and when not in use, to have conspicuously placed to serve as a conversation piece. Like people who don't play guitar but hang one on a wall or put it on a stand in a well lit corner. Oh, I didn't know you played guitar. Well, I don't, but I like the look of it, and maybe one of these days someone will come over who does. You see that all the time. It's even in TV commercials over here. I see there's always a guitar somewhere. You know, why? They're everywhere, hanging on walls in the corners. Uh, when I was a kid, people used to do that, or like in the 40s and 50s before I was a kid, people would buy a piano for the same sort of reason. Do you play piano? Well, no, not really. But, you can put some lace doilies on top of it and some waxed fruit and some photographs in nice silver frames. And maybe one of our friends will come over and play Broadway hits for us someday. No, my goal was to be able to sit in front of the window uh, in my studio slash study slash office slash storage space when the weather was bad, or under a tree somewhere and play in what can only be described as a haunting style of Patrick O'Hearn's soundtrack to an old film called Silent Tongue, or to try to talk to birds, which is what Chris Wood of Traffic used to do. He would sit under a tree, and in the morning, his friends would come out and see him playing and imitating a bird sounds, as he said they had the best melodies. And that's very true. So, I mean, look, it was not my intention, you know, I wasn't going to audition for the Berlin Philharmonic. I just wanted to produce meditative sounds for myself. Now, as anyone who has experienced it will be quick to tell you, the early days of learning to play any instrument can be both frustrating and disheartening. I mean, when you're a kid, it's tough, learning to play piano, learning to play saxophone, especially learning to play something like violin. You got to carry it around, you got to do these things, put your hands in positions you wouldn't normally do, and it hurts, and you're not brilliant right off the bat. You can't play anything. And you just kind of want to throw your hands up and say later on that. And sometimes that's the best. That's for the best to do. But it's tough. And as anyone who's experienced will be quick to tell you, having to listen to someone who's in the early days of learning to play an instrument can be excruciating. Um, when I was learning to play bass. Before that, I was learning to play guitar. I don't know how my mom just put up with it. I mean, she would be somewhere in the house, and I'm sure no matter what was going on, maybe she turned the radio up loud or something, but otherwise she would hear hour after hour just boom, 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 boom. You know, the only thing worse I can imagine would probably be having a kid who wanted to be a drummer. Uh, I mean, it's tough being a parent of an aspiring musician, but we couldn't do it without him. So just throw that in. With the coming of winter, I would likely be spending more time indoors than out in the world. Uh, my daily practice regimen would therefore need to be conducted such a manner as to not inconvenience the rest of the household or the neighbors. I didn't used to worry about such things. Now I think about it first. Uh, for the time being, though, and as long as the wet and cold held off, uh, maybe there'd be an unseasonably warm winter. You know, I would restrict my playing to the great outdoors. The only question still to be answered was that of location. I would need a fairly isolated spot, one well removed from vehicular traffic and far enough off the jogging, walking, and biking paths to discourage casual inquiries. I needed clear sight lines. This is important if you're going to be outside. You need clear sight lines that would allow me enough time to clear out should anyone feel they really needed to talk to some weirdo with a flute. Because somebody, what you doing? You know, come on, what's it look like I'm doing? But, what are you going to do? So now, what may be the highest elevation in this area, which is really sort of an incongruous little bump on the landscape that may or may not have an official designation, uh, but which I call Boogie's Hill, is about a 15-minute bike ride from the house. It's bordered on the north and east by forest, and it offers clear views to the south and the west. On the western edge of the summit is a curved wood and steel construction intended for viewing the sunset, though I have yet to see anyone sit on it at any time of day. There's a small plaque on a pedestal near one end, which I assume explains the who, what, and why of it. The plaque is in Dutch, of course, but as I felt there's no doubt as to what the purpose of the structure was, and I wasn't interested in who was responsible for its creation and placement, I never bothered with a translation. What it looks like, it's a curved piece with wood posts and some metal bolted into it, like bleacher seats in a high school gymnasium. And it's a curve facing west so you can watch the sunset. It looks like some modernist Swedish design trash that you would get from IKEA. Uh, but I'm sure someone, so again, I'm not an artsy guy, right? I don't know. So there may be deeper levels that I'm missing. But, for my part, I think the hill's just fine without this thing. But again, I'm not an art guy. We'll let it go. So, uh, so that's would be my outdoor practice sign. Okay, right by that thing. Now the flute arrived on the promised day, which was the 19th of October. It was also my son Spencer's birthday, so that was a good omen, I thought. There were 12 days left in the month. The weather was beginning to turn. It's getting a little chillier each day, and the threat of rain seemed never quite far away. I live very close to the North Sea, so you just never know when a rain squall or high winds are going to come up. It's just the way it is. Anyways, it wasn't promising at the moment. I spent that afternoon and evening just polishing the flute and familiarizing my hands with the feel, the weight, and the balance of it. Half a century on, I still remembered pretty much how to hold it, how to position my fingers. Now, I assembled and took it apart several times, making sure everything fit and lined up properly. It's important. It's always been one of the risks, when you buy any instrument sight unseen. Is it going to work right? Is it going to be messed up? Who knows? Do they test these things before they send them out to you? I don't know. So you get it and you got to check it out right away because you got to return it. I mean, it's one of the last things you want to get involved with is returning an instrument. You got to wait for a decision to be made on whether it was indeed flawed or if it can be repaired or if it should be replaced. Then you got to wait for that to arrive. And then once more, you start the process over again and hoping everything would be just fine the second time around while expecting the worst. But there you are. What can you do? And especially if, like me, you don't really play flute, it's not like I can try one out in the store and say, "Oh yeah, this feels right." Come on. You, there's a particle of risk in everything. Ask Allardyce T. Merriweather. There's a particle of risk in everything. So that's what you do, but you hope for the best. Uh, Now, at no point that first day did I blow into the mouthpiece. That would wait until the next day. So, 10 o'clock that evening, I broke down the flute carefully, wiped each segment to remove any residual oils or fingerprints, put them in a case. The next day was cool but clear. There's no rain in the forecast. It was 8 a.m., not long after sunrise at that time of year. Pink-tinged clouds hung motionless like cotton balls pasted on the blue sky of a child's art project. At 8:30, I was out the door on my bike. I made a quick stop back at the MCD for croissants, then headed for the A20 highway overpass. And the next stop after that would be Boogie's Hill. As I had expected and as I'd hoped, there was no one on the summit, no one reading the plaque on the pedestal, no one looning about on that arc of wood and steel. I had the hill to myself. Now, something you have to understand, all instruments are sensitive to temperature. It doesn't matter if they're made out of wood, plastic, steel, brass, anything. Temperature can affect their tuning, their intonation, and playability. Now, according to the spec sheet, my flute, which is described as being a perfect study or backup flute, was made of nickel and silver. Um, there's only the slightest hint of breeze, and as noted, it's cool but not cold. According to the 24-hour forecast, um, it would get a little warmer as the morning wore on, but in the afternoon there'd be more clouds, lower temperatures, and a 60% chance of rain. I don't know how you figure the odds. That must be one of those things they teach you at weatherman school. How to figure the odds of whether it's going to rain or snow or sunny or whatever. I certainly don't understand it. Um, so there was that. There's also a possibility of strong winds. Again, we're right by the North Sea. That is always a chance. Um, so I figured the flute would be okay. For all my enthusiasm and anticipation, I didn't see myself spending 4 or 5 hours out there working on this. Another time, perhaps, not today. First day, this was our meet and greet day. You have to do that with instruments, just like you would with a little dog or cat. You bring them in, you got to get them used to place, got to get acclimated. They got to get used to you. And that's how it is with musical instruments. Uh, as it was, I did spend about an hour working on consistently getting a single pure note using just a head joint. That's what you call the part you blow into. So I was just sitting there and it was going, and after a while, I got some consistency. Got to start. Uh, Now, at noon, I wiped down the flute, put it back in its case, and spent the entire morning with it in my hands. Well, I had it been in my hands, but I wasn't like practicing the whole time. Periodically, I walked around the summit of the hill, stretching my legs and looking at the sky for signs of an expected turn in the weather. Uh, by that point, the temperature hadn't dropped, but the breeze had picked up some. The croissants, which were made with real butter, had been delicious. I, I jotted down about a page and a half of notes, thoughts, and observations in the notebook I brought along, including buy a thermos for tea. Okay. Uh, Earlier, shortly after 10 o'clock, actually, a rather rustic looking individual had paused on the path, called up to me, and waved. Having no idea what he said, I waved back. He was accompanied by a long haired black and white dog. I think it's a type of sheep dog and a Belgian, I believe. They're not as big as, well, the ones I've seen are not as big as the standard American collie or sheepdog, even. But anyway, they're nice enough. And there's plenty of them around here. Uh, Anyways, and next thing I know, he was coming up the hill. So we exchanged hellos, after which he said something, naturally in Dutch, accompanied by a slow, sweeping gesture uh, towards the open fields to the west, and I was talking it the whole time. And I was making friends with his dog until he finished. And then I said, sorry, I don't speak Dutch, unfortunately. And he says, sorry. I was wondering if you had lost your sheep, if you were looking for them. No, I just came here to play my flute. I'm just learning. When I was a young boy, he said, I played, and he pantomimed the familiar motions of a violinist. Violin? Yes, the violin. Do you still play? He held up his hands. They were gnarled and scarred, and the tips of the middle and ring fingers of his left hand were missing. There was an accident. No more violin. I'm sorry. But, he smiled and pointed to his head, I still remember. They looked up and said, the cold is coming. Well, goodbye. As he and his dog turned to leave, I called out one of the few Dutch phrases I'd mastered, uh, taught to me by my friend Pete. Tot ziens. It's goodbye. It's a handy thing to know. So I said, tot ziens. He paused, looked back at me, and he laughed. Yes, tot ziens, he said. He waved and then continued down the hill. After a last look around to make sure I'd picked up and packed everything, I pulled out my backpack. Yeah, this would be a good place as long as the weather held. And I would certainly be back in the spring. And that's that, because look who's here. We've come across, yes, Mr. Dancing Jack of Hearts once again to tell us it's time to stop. So we're going to. Next time we'll be talking, we'll be picking up with Music on the Wind. And now things start happening. So, I hope that worked a little bit better uh, with the sort of condensed version. Uh, I think I was surprised at how soon it was finished, to tell you the truth. I hope it worked out well for you. Again, let me know. right? And if you don't hear about it from me, Jimmy will be here Friday and he'll talk about it. But so I think that's all we got. And now I think we'll call it a day. So thanks again uh, for tuning in to Gold Coast After Dark. And hope to see you again sometime. Here we go.